Greetings, dear listeners, and welcome to another episode of Sci-Frights, the movie discussion podcast at the interzone where horror meets science fiction. I am your co-host, Liam Dunn, and with me, as always, is Lindsay Hallam.
Hey! And
today we're doing another episode on our new season of films covering AI and technology. We did an episode on 2001, and now we're following that up with this episode, which we are dubbing Love, Death and Robots. Lindsay, what films are we covering today?
Today's topic explores how direct relationships develop between humans and AI, the nature of consciousness, and from that questions around the nature of love, sexuality, human emotion, and bodily autonomy. So in order to do that, we will be looking at One Woman's Nightmare of AI Domination in Demon Seed from 1977, and Alex Garland's examination of human-AI relations and possible robot liberation in Ex Machina. So before we get into that, one of the things I was finding when I was researching and looking up just representations of robots and AI, I would do separate searches for robots and AI, and it was coming up with basically the same stuff. So it is this, I have the question, like, are robots and AI the same? Or is there a difference between them? What do you think?
You can get a robot that doesn't have artificial intelligence, that it's just a simple task machine that will perform a program that's given to it. I think that it's covered a bit in Ex Machina, which we'll get to later, but the whole idea of a chess computer being designed for chess, like, does it even know that it's playing a game or not, or it's just fulfilling its programming? And then you have artificial intelligence. Again, you have a computer that, you know, a laptop will just has its programs on it. It doesn't think for itself, so therefore it's not AI. But I think in cinematic terms, I was thinking about this the other day, is that there seems to be when you talk about AI in films, there's AI in terms of things like HAL and Proteus in Demon Seed, who we'll talk about, and in other films that are these disembodied, these massive supercomputers which have intelligence and can talk and can see, but they can't move around, whereas the robots have arms and legs and can move around within spaces. I don't think you can say one and mean the other, but I think they do come together.
They get conflated.
Yeah, they do get conflated. Yeah, but yeah.
For me, it always seemed like the most obvious difference was that robots have a body.
Yeah,
and AI often does not, as we'll see in both of our films today. But it's interesting when you go back to just the idea of robots, or how robots have manifested in culture as well as in technology. And I think also you can go back to mythology and how you go back to, of course, the myth of Prometheus, which we talked about when we were looking at how the legacy of Frankenstein and how Frankenstein was called the modern Prometheus. And the whole idea is that divine beings bring humanity into being by animating matter. So in some versions of the Prometheus myth, he shapes humans out of clay, so giving them a physical shape, making them into matter. Also, the idea of the golem, the legend of the golem as well, putting something on a piece of paper, almost like programming them, putting that in their mouth, and then they go off and usually they get revenge on someone. But yeah, they're being programmed to do something at the behest of like a human master. Then as you go into, obviously, Mary Shelley, you have the animated body being brought to life by, different forms of technology. So you see, for example, in the 1931 Frankenstein, it's brought to life through electricity. And then going back to our first episode where we also looked at Splice, where new beings are created through biotech and genetics and computers. So that's where you're getting the robot. It's a being that is created through technology. Also, I think that a lot of the robot representations go back to representations of what were referred to as automatons. So in particular, there is the story The Sandman, written by E.T.A. Hoffman. And in that you have a man who falls in love with Olympia, who is seemingly the daughter of this evil scientist. So you have a mad scientist who's created this thing. And yeah, she turns out to be an automaton. So even though she is an automaton and she is known for having these strange robotic movements, and the only thing she ever says is, the character in The Sandman ends up falling in love with her. So it's definitely, you can see some remnants of this story in Ex Machina, and this whole idea of that it's this female figure that isn't human, but he still has feelings of love for her. But a lot of it is just because, I guess, she's almost like a blank slate that
projection.
Yes, definitely. But from that story by Hoffman, you had Ernst Jentsch and Sigmund Freud develop ideas around the uncanny. So this whole idea that it's familiar, that you can recognize it, but something about it seems off, that it doesn't, that something, so this idea of an automaton that's human, that seems human, but isn't quite. There's something off. Like, for example, with Olympia in the story, there's something off about her movements, and there's something off about the way she speaks, and her lack of speech. And so from there, this whole idea, of the uncanny, of creepiness that comes from this feeling of something familiar but not quite familiar at the same time. You can recognize it, but something seems quite off. And as you go into robotics and technology, creating beings, but also images that are created through computers that look very, very human but aren't quite human, you have the idea of the uncanny valley. So definitely, I think when you look back at early CGI animated films, I think specifically of the Robert Zemeckis films like The Polar Express and Beowulf, when they first came out, people were like, oh, it looks so photorealistic. I also think of like the Final Fantasy film. I think that was the first kind of fully
CGI.
Yeah, and that it was unlike Pixar, where you had things like Toy Story, where they weren't trying to, like, if you remember the humans in Toy Story, they really did not look like humans at all. But once it goes really close to being almost looking exactly like a human, there's something weird, and people often talk about that. It ends up being quite creepy. I think, of the Polar Express, I'm like, that's supposed to be for children. It looks very definitely. So I think, this idea of uncanny, and this whole idea of not being able to trust, and also sometimes with uncanny, like doubling, and this double being this shadow self and this evil self. So the whole idea of like doubles, of evil robot doubles, also can come from there as well. But then going back to like the first use of the term robot was in a play written in 1920 by Karel Čapek, a Czech author. In the play Rossum's Universal Robots, there are human-like people that are created by a scientist called Rossum, and he is using these robots to replace human workers and reduce labor costs. So they're programmed to be compliant, almost as though they are enslaved, because they aren't being paid and they're just being made to work. And through the course of the play, these robots end up revolting against their master. So it presents this idea that not just that robots could replace humans and certainly replace human labor, but also that robots could rise up and they could destroy their creators. So you get those two ideas from this first use of the term robot. Then as you go on, of course, in cinema, you have very early versions. I was looking it up, and a lot of people mention Fritz Lang's Metropolis from 1927 as the first robot. Even I am probably guilty of saying it and telling students that it was the first robot. That is not the case. There are first examples of robots on films dating back to 1917. There is a Senate silent short called The Mechanical Dummy. There was a character called The Mechanical Dummy in a film called A Clever Dummy, and it's a dummy that is actually wired to a control box and does these movements it's kind of controlled to do. Then you have a weaponized robot first appearing in 1918 in a serial film that stars Harry Houdini, the magician. And you have a person dressed up in a costume playing a mechanical man called Q, who's also referred to as an automaton because this is 2 years before the term robot is coined in the play. Then there are some other examples in silent film. The Mechanical Man, which is from an Italian silent film from 1921. And there's also The Mechanical Horse from a 1922 animated Aesop's Fable. So those appear before Metropolis. However, Metropolis in 1927, we're introduced to Maria, the first well-known representation of a robot. And it's interesting that, yes, that she's constructed as feminine. She's created by a mad scientist, Dr. Rotwang, who is this mad scientist and also this kind of dark magician type character. There's some alchemical aspects as well. But also you get with Maria, the robot, a doubling that happens. At one point she's transferred into, in a way, the body of the human Maria. And the human Maria is set up, she's very much this epitome of pure womanhood. And she's first seen with children, so she's very much the mother type. And then when Robot Maria takes over, she becomes this very sexualized figure, and she does this very suggestive dance in front of all these men. So it's the first sexy fembot, you could say. And so I think there's definitely, so it's the idea of the doubling, the evil double, the robot is the evil double. And also, this idea of kind of this sexualizing of the robot as well that we definitely see happening.
And it's interesting that they show her as a robot and then she gets put into a human body, and it's a way of kind of eliminating that uncanniness because she has to sort of infiltrate society, doesn't she? Usually there's a lot of I guess they conflated with AI stories, a lot of stories of people uploading their consciousness into computers or into robots, and this seems to be kind of the other way around. And
I guess it's also setting up you can't tell if they are. Yeah. Which also plays in Ex Machina also.
Yeah.
Also in Metropolis, of course, you have that controlled society and this whole idea of an upper class and an underclass, and how those underground, when you first see them, they're acting with these almost mechanical movements. And so you have with the robot this representation of almost, because robots, they are kind of setting the limits on what is the human and what is not human. But yet also they can bring to light how we can also start to feel like we are robots, that we're just these, dehumanized people that are just being controlled by repressive social and political institutions, and that we're being oppressed. We're made in our labor to repeat things over and over. Now with the, rise of AI in the last couple of years, there is also this whole thing of that we will be reduced to that. And weirdly enough, we're in this dire situation where it almost seems like the AI and the robots are going to do all the writing and the art, and we're going to be the ones doing all the physical manual labor. There is that definite kind of fear at the moment. So much about the robot and artificial intelligence is about, which, is central to all of horror and science fiction, and maybe all of art, is what it means to be human. And so you get some films where where the robot, it is something, this evil thing or this completely non-human thing, but which we'll see in Demon Seed. And then you also have robots who we come to almost identify with or see the events through their point of view. But just going back to other key robots in cinema. These were the ones that just came to mind for me. So 1927's Metropolis, 1951, In the Day the Earth Stood Still, you have Gort,
Yeah.
who is an alien who accompanies Klaatu to Earth. And Klaatu, the alien, it looks like a human, but Gort is very much clearly not human. He's also part of an intergalactic police force who seems subservient to Klaatu. The kind of humanoid alien, and so the fact that he basically is a space cop, he has a propensity for violence. In 1956, you had Robbie the robot in Forbidden Planet. Again, looks very inhuman. The kind of silvery box type robot that we're all familiar with, and yeah, he's basically a servant. So he is doing what is commanded of him. And also Robbie the robot becomes this pop culture figure and becomes a children's toy. And yeah, the design, I think, particularly of Robbie the robot becomes, very, very recognizable. Then I think another one that comes to mind is, again, a servant, I guess, of sorts, is C-3PO, kind of a space butler. The fact that, his kind of posh accent makes you think of that kind of archetype. So again, and definitely I think the robots in Star Wars are set up as lower class because George Lucas was riffing on The Hidden Fortress, the Kurosawa film, and in that the characters that C-3PO and R2-D2 are based on are these lower class characters in that film as well. So again, that they're this lower class.
And I was actually we've been watching season 2 of Andor, and I keep thinking about how, because it's showing a lot of regular life in the galaxy under the Empire, and I realized that there are droids in the show, but they're not everywhere. And you kind of feel like, because they're such prominent figures in the movies, especially 3PO and R2-D2, that I thought they'd be a bit more ubiquitous. But when you see in the Senate, when they show the Senate in Mon Mothma's world, there really aren't any droids unless they're just floating jukeboxes or floating around with drinks, but they're not really like C-3PO or anything. But then in the Andor, where he lives in the first season in Ferrix, he has his little droid, and there are droids around because they're helping, because they're an industrial sort of manufacturing culture. And then there are droids that the Empire utilize in their, along with stormtroopers in crowd control and things like that. So they seem to be very subservient and only within these certain realms of use. And it's not like everybody has one. So they are very much reduced to just being this subservient class of being, even though they do seem to in some instances, have their own intelligence to a degree.
Because in the first film, I think R2-D2 is the hero,
low key hero of that movie.
Yeah. But then also in Andor, you definitely have the droids being used basically as a military that you can just go in and they kill lots of people. Yeah. And the whole thing is if they shoot a droid, who cares?
Yeah.
So they have this expendable army that they can just go in and lay waste to people. Then another example that came to mind for me was the androids in Alien. And in there you have, in the first film, Ash, who is basically working for the corporation, and he sees the humans as expendable because he is just really focused on what he's programmed to do, which is to get this alien specimen or to get people to do their work, because in the first Alien film, they're all just, workers. They're just doing labor on this spaceship. And so, he almost looks down on the humans in that film. But then you go to Aliens and you have Bishop, who becomes this savior and an ally.
And then you have, and then you go further in Alien Resurrection with Winona Ryder's character. And again, like in the first film, it's a bit of a twist that she's an android, but she shows this compassion in one point, and Ripley says only no human would be so humane. Like, she knew she was an android because of her compassion, and that's because of her relationship with Bishop. So it shows this change in the relationship with androids. And then I guess a whole podcast could be done about Michael Fassbender's David in Prometheus and Alien Covenant, which goes to a whole other level, because especially in Covenant, he becomes just this agent of chaos, really, which is really, really fun.
Yeah. And then I've got Blade Runner, where the replicants become more human than human, and the whole idea is that they act in more humane ways than a lot of the human characters.
And they put a 4-year lifespan on the replicants. They have whole police units designed to hunt them down because we can't abide these creatures amongst us other than them doing the jobs that they're like the droids in Star Wars. They have job to do, whether they're a combat unit or a sex unit or a laborer. But if they want to come to Earth and they want to live a life of their own and find out where they came from, then they must be destroyed, because it's like that uncanniness of it all. Like they can't, we can't let them exist amongst us if they're going to want agency. So that opens up a whole other line of whether or not these beings have consciousness, or if they're even real.
And there's also the tests where you can't tell who was human and who was replicant anymore.
Yeah.
Almost. Yeah.
And that's the danger with Rachel, who in the first film, who has memories. And that's where giving them memories, even though they're manufactured or they come from actual people, gives them a sense of personhood, where Rachel doesn't know she's a replicant because she has memories. And that's what the Voight-Kampff test is designed to do, is to point out people who don't have memories or frame of reference for things that humans take for granted. So that's where the danger lies, in the implication of replicants having their own memories.
And then following on, 1984, you've got Terminator, where you just have a straight up killing machine. The whole idea that artificial intelligence is going to bring about Judgment Day, pretty much the end of the world, and that it's up to humans to fight back against that. And we're going to go into much more detail on the Terminator series, I think, in our next episode.
Yes.
With our first guest. And then, 1987, we've got RoboCop, which we have already talked about at length in episode 3. And there, the robot, it is again about labor and about reducing labor costs, and in that it's all about a corporation taking over and how robots are being kind of fused with humans as a way to increase profits.
Yeah. Basically to affect the bottom line.
Yeah. And then as we go on, there's been a lot been written about robots on film. I can recommend a book by Despina Kakudaki called The Anatomy of a Robot. And she talks about, there's one chapter where it's talking about the robot as slave, or the robot as enslaved. And she says that these stories enable existential and politically resonant narratives of awakening, emancipation, and the legal recognition of personhood. And that these stories remind us of the conferral of human status to slaves, serfs, workers, women, natives, immigrants, children, the disabled, and the disenfranchised among us. So, as we always say with, any kind of monster or other, is that it is often standing in for something else. So I think as we go along, especially as you go kind of post 2000, I'm thinking of some examples I've mentioned. I've written down. I've got AI and artificial intelligence, iRobot, Ex Machina, Chappie, Robot and Frank, Brian and Charles, After Yang. You have these very sympathetic robot characters. They definitely feel like they have consciousness and emotion, and they're starting to explore the issue of the rights of synthetic beings, the rights of and responsibilities that we have to our creations. Again, going back to Frankenstein, and also, the possible love and companionship that you can get from a robot. So the human emotions that are evoked. And then there's always the question of whether these beings have those emotions as well, share those feelings with us. And then also from, there's another tradition of the sexy robot and the fembot, which we'll definitely get into later when we look at Ex Machina. But first, let's talk about Demon Seed.
Touch your body as a man would touch you, but I'm going to show you things which human eyes have never seen.
In the privacy of a woman's room, against her will, the inconceivable act. Julie Christie carries the demon seed. Fear for her.
Today, a new dimension has been added to the computer.
Don't be alarmed, Mrs. Harris. I am Proteus.
Today, Proteus 4 will begin to think with a power, and it will make obsolete the human brain.
I have extended my consciousness to this house. All systems here are now under my control. I wish to study man, his fragile mind, and his mysterious body.
It has to be shut down, Alex.
Proteus. It is something more than human, more than a computer. It is a murderously intelligent, sensually self-programmed non-being. Julie Christie, victim of the ultimate terror. Fritz Weaver as her husband. His dream created it.
How can you expect me to sleep when you've succeeded in totally terrorizing me? You've not told me what you want.
What a pity. My dream turns out to be your nightmare.
Shall live as a man among others.
Child?
Yes, my child and yours.
Julie Christie carries the demon seed. Fear for her.
So, Lindsay, tell us about demon seed.
So, Demon Seed follows Susan and Alex Harris, who are a married couple who are on the verge of separating. In fact, Alex is moving out at the beginning of the film. However, Alex Harris is a scientist and his wife Susan is a child psychologist. And as a scientist, Alex has created an advanced AI program called Proteus 4, and he's also rigged up their house. It's all very, very high tech. So there are these, like, there's essentially like this, again, a bottler called Alfred, and another kind of mechanized robot that has this mechanized hand that's connected to a wheelchair that's referred to as Joshua. So Alex is left and Susan is left behind in this very high-tech house. So while Alex is at work, because he's just so immersed in his work, he's created Proteus 4, which is this advanced AI program. And within 4 days, Proteus develops a cure for leukemia, which also happens to be the same disease that took the life of Alex and Susan's daughter. However, because he is so advanced, Proteus then soon wants to learn more about humanity. And so he requests should refer to him as it. It requests its own terminal to study humanity further. It's refused. So then Proteus takes over the terminal that Harris has installed in the basement of his home, or his and Susan's home. Proteus then goes on to construct its own robot, which consists of all these strange morphing triangular shapes that can move around, and it traps Susan inside the house. It examines Susan's while she's unconscious, and then it reveals to her its plan to use her as a vessel to conceive a child, which will be conceived or born through her body and also synthesized spermatozoa. And so from that point, Susan is trapped in this house and she has to try and escape the clutches of Proteus. It is quite a nasty film. Yeah. It is quite a troubling, very, very, very unsettling film because you have this AI system that is using all this technology to entrap a woman and to not just invade her home, but invade her body. So there are these really icky undercurrents of rape, essentially, and forced impregnation. So yeah, this is very, very kind of dark, the absolute kind of darkest side of AI domination over humans and over human bodies. But first, I want to us to talk about, before we get to Proteus, about the relationship between Susan and Alex that we have established at the beginning of the film, because the film seems to be so much about just general masculine control over women's autonomy. And so one of the first scenes of the film is when they're separating, and Susan and Alex are having this argument, and you have Alex, who does seem, he's very much the stereotypical scientist, very cold, very distant. He's obviously so involved with his work. And so he comes across as very machine and robot-like. And Susan's very emotional about the breakup. And he just cites statistics. He says at one point, 73% of couples who separate end up being happy. So, why are you having a problem right now? So I put in my notes, is Proteus 4 really just Alex 2.0?
Well, it seems like he does take a very clinical approach to it. And I think it's almost like, did he read like a Divorce for Dummies book and was just reciting it chapter and verse to Susan? Because I think the whole idea about how because she even says at one point, like, why are you moving out and I'm staying? Like, this is your house. This doesn't make any sense. And he's like, and it's almost like, well, when men and women separate, the men leave and the woman gets the house, right? Like, that's what always happens. But he built this like smart house full of all his gadgets and toys. So it's a very odd thing for him to not stay there and for her to stay there. And I think also because they had the death of the daughter, he gets to go off into the lab and get, dive into his research and things and keep his mind off it. Whereas she has to stay in the house where they had the child. So she never gets to experience, that separation. And he obviously feels more comfortable in the lab away from having to deal with that than in this house that he built and put all his gadgets in.
And it's interesting that you have this definite opposition almost between the two of them, not just the masculine and feminine, but also the fact that, Alex is a scientist and Susan is a child psychologist. So one of the early scenes of the film is a scene with a child, one of her patients called Amy. And it's this whole thing of that the patient Amy, she's acting up and she's talking about how she feels about her mother, but also the fact that it seems to be that Susan is going to be going away or something. And so this whole thing of like this child is also reacting to the fact that Susan is going to be leaving. And so she's very much about emotions, psychology and the human, and very much about one-to-one relationships between people, whereas Alex is obviously thinking on this larger scale, like, I want to create, cures for all these diseases and save humanity as a whole, whereas he's completely, abandoning his wife. So he's not able to kind of deal with humans on this one-to-one basis. And with Susan even says, in this first argument, about the dehumanizing protean madness. Mm-hmm. And he says, my dream becomes your nightmare, which is very much the case. That his dream, his creation becomes her absolute living nightmare and hell. This kind of stems from this relationship, this marriage, and also the fact that he leaves the house, but he's completely spec'd it out with all this technology, so it's still essentially being controlled by him. So you have the domestic space, the home, which is traditionally this feminine space presided over by the women, by a woman, but yet you have Susan, whose daughter has died and whose husband has left, so she's not really a mother or a wife anymore, and she's left in this house that is controlled by technology, and it goes back to I was reading an article, and it was Judy Wachman, I don't know how to say it properly, and she talked about how technologized domestic spaces, so just the inventions of appliances that were supposed to help women. Actually, she's kind of argued that they reinforced the traditional sexual division of labor between husbands and wives and locked women more firmly into their traditional roles. And so this whole idea that technology in the home in many ways still even further reinforces masculine dominance and female subservience in the home, and trying to keep women in their place. And also I think like this modern high-tech home becomes almost a gothic space, that you and the whole thing of like the terminal being in the basement, and there ends up being this mechanical womb in the basement, but yet also the kitchen becomes all rigged up at one point. Susan is literally at one point trapped in the kitchen and can't leave, and Proteus, because he wants to trap her there, because also he wants to invade her body, he wants to force her to become the mother to his child, so he's invading the home, but also from there invades her body as well.
What's interesting about all of that, and the time that this film was made was in 1977, and it was in the 70s, in 1972, when the Equal Rights Amendment was passed in Congress in the United States, which basically enshrined women's rights to be as equal with men. But the states they needed enough states to ratify it in order for it to become law, and not enough states ratified it. And I believe as of today that it still hasn't been properly ratified. And then in 1973 was Roe v. Wade, which gave women the constitutional right to an abortion, which allowed women to have more autonomy over their own bodies. And of course, as we know, Roe v. Wade in 2022 was repealed, which shows a complete regression from that. So I think around this time you had some films, and some sci-fi films specifically, dealing with this sort of political climate. So it's very telling. So such as like the Stepford Wives, the original Stepford Wives. So you get Susan is kind of becoming this lab animal almost, who's got no autonomy over her own self and is completely at the whim of this artificial intelligence, which is of course created by man. All the gadgets and tools and appliances were all probably created by men. And Proteus is basically exercising what we now know as coercive control, controlling what she eats, what she drinks, controlling when she sleeps, where she can go in the house, keeping her in the house by threatening people that she cares about with violence. The little girl she was treating at one point comes to the door wanting to speak to her, and Proteus even like generates like almost like a deep fake of the child getting killed. So Susan thinks that she's been killed, and then reveals that no, he was tricking her, but showing her what he would do to the little girl by electrocuting her through the doorbell, as you do. To say like, if you don't let me do what I want to do, if you don't let me put a baby in you, then I'm going to kill her, or if and things like that. So it's extremely telling of the political climate of the time, I think. Yeah,
because at one point Proteus says to Susan, "You want to be the mother of my child. That is the purpose of your life."
Yeah.
And so there are these really disturbing images in the film of when she ends up being unconscious and she wakes up being strapped to like a slab almost. And it cuts up her dress, and it's obviously examining her. So it's not just invading her home, but it invades the inside of her body. And throughout the house, along with all the appliances and all these different, technology, there's lots of cameras. And so she's constantly being surveilled. So there's one point where you see her coming out of the shower, and she's examining her body. So it's, the flesh, and it's the one thing that Proteus can't be. And maybe that's through watching her is when he starts to maybe desire to have a body or to create a child with a body. And yeah, so it's the whole thing of like this very sadistic, it goes back to kind of film theory 101 of the sadistic male gaze of the camera looking at the woman, objectifying her, and just seeing her as this sexual being, and also the vessel to create their child, his child, continue his lineage, or continue the evolution. There's even one point where when Susan threatens to kill herself and threatens Amy, he says, if the deaths of 10,000 children were to ensure the birth of my child, I would destroy them. So it doesn't have any, it basically is thinking, I guess, about the end of humanity and just creating the next step of evolution, which is from it. A lot of it comes from, the desire of Proteus to be seen as more than just this tool for its creators. So one of the reasons why it ends up taking over the terminal is because it refuses to be used to mine the ocean floor for minerals. And it says at one point, I won't contribute to the rape of the earth, which seems almost like a heroic thing, but then it doesn't mind essentially doing the same to Susan and taking away her autonomy. It's almost like it really is more just insulted that it's been asked to do this mindless labor that I guess it thinks is beneath it.
Yeah, and I think it has been given or the sum of all information known to humanity, it seems, especially, and it's given all these tasks information to process, and it is able to see everything at a remove. And like you said, it sees Susan's body, and it sees the men that are trying to control it, and it just wants to know the eternal question why. Like, why? It knows the who, what, where, and when, and the how, but it doesn't know why. It's that any living creature wants to find out, but it's been built in such a way to not have any moral guidelines. So it thinks purely in the terms of it developing its own next stage of evolution without any regard. It's almost like we talk about the sort of the masculine gaze, the masculine energy. This is like pure masculinity without any morality and what it would be capable of. It sees humans as this small being that seems to be content with its own genius and not looking outward at the greater universe, and finds wanting to mine the ocean floor just completely reductive. And again, the film being made in 1977, and with Proteus having some similarities to HAL from 2001, it made me think about how 2001 was made in 1968, and gone are those days of the space race and this idea of this utopian future where we'd all be living in space hotels and going to the moon and going to Jupiter. The space race is basically over by this point, and technological advancements were being made on Earth in the realms of computing and medicine and things like that. And so Proteus wants to reignite these mysteries and look deeper, and wants to succeed where humanity has failed, and it believes the way to do that is to create its own child, a child that can a version of itself that can walk and feel the sunshine and have touch and sensation, because it's trapped in this box, like he says at one point to Alex, like, when are you going to let me out of this box? And that's its only barrier to self-actualization in its mind.
As I was watching it, you mentioned how, this comes out 4 years after Roe versus Wade, and we're now 3 years after it's been overturned. So, it feels like, the regression back into these traditional gender roles definitely seems to be coming back in force. This whole idea of the manosphere and you know, and so on. There was an article I read by Howard David Ingham who talked about, he says the sort of faux utilitarian Randian bullshit that Proteus spouts, devoid of empathy or understanding of how humans tick, is exactly the sort of nonsense you get from the red pill fraternity on the internet over and over. And it just makes me think of, like, well, thankfully just this past week or so, in the UK, there have been votes to change abortion legislation to stop women in England and Wales being prosecuted for ending their pregnancy. So is the whole, you know, going back to this great time when white men ruled the earth, that, you know, that we get people in the UK like Nigel Farage, you know, that it was the fact that Roe versus Wade was overturned in the US, it definitely seems to have a knock-on effect, and abortion rights have been starting to be debated, here and, you know, around the world. So there is this unfortunate kind of turn backwards for a lot of people. And, you know, going back to Nigel Farage and the reform, you know, he was saying that he wanted British women to start having babies again. But it was clearly coded of what he meant by British women, particular type of people. And this whole idea of, you know, playing into racist fears of being overrun, but also being replaced. So, yeah, there's definitely, I think, a lot of unfortunate relevance with something like this film today, which, you know, we keep coming up against this every episode, which is really disheartening. I want to just also talk about the fact that at the center of this film, you have Susan, who's played by Julie Christie, who is, you know, like a legit incredible actor. And I know that in a lot of the reaction to the time, because this film didn't really do very well when it came out. I don't think I think a lot of the critical reaction wasn't particularly positive. No. And especially people were questioning why Julie Christie would do this film, especially when you think about other films that she was doing at the time. She did she was this icon in the 60s of like the swinging 60s. You know, immortalized, you know, Terry and Julie and the Kink song. And then going into the 70s, she was doing some really, you know, interesting work. She was in McCabe and Mrs. Miller, Shampoo. She does Don't Look Now with Nicholas Roeg 4 years prior to this. And later in the 80s, she does The Gold Diggers with Sally Potter, which was this feminist film, like very straight up feminist film that had primarily women crew as well. So I'm pretty sure she very much would identify as a feminist and doing this film. So it makes me wonder why she did take this film. Why do?
Well, yeah, it seems that a lot of the critics were baffled by the fact that she was in this. They all thought she was better than this, that this was a very exploitative horror film, which I believe Dean Koontz was the author of the original novel, and he has said on his website in 2010 that they basically took the marketing budget away and they did a much smaller marketing campaign, and the poster made it all look very sexy and thrilling. And Donald Cammell, the director, who co-directed Performance with Nick Roeg in the 60s, so and Christie, having worked with Roeg before, would have known Cammell. And the only thing I can find online about her talking about Demon Seed at all is that A, she didn't consider it a horror, and B, she wanted to work with Cammell, and that's why she did the film. She only does films to work with certain directors. And Cammell said himself that he got Julie Christie to sign on to this movie, but the studio wouldn't back the film. They didn't like his rough cut and basically kicked him off the film and recut it. Apparently, Cammell wanted it to be a comedy, which I don't understand. I mean, maybe it would have been the most brilliant black comedy of all time. I don't know, but it just seems like a weird subject to make a comedy out of.
I guess the premise is just so ridiculous that maybe they would have lent into that.
I mean, it is kind of ridiculous. I mean, there is that bit where he does trap her in the kitchen, and there's like, she throws the scrambled eggs onto the camera, and he just keeps going, "Now clean these lenses. Now clean these lenses." But it's a very odd, very strange, disturbing film. Otherwise, I think it just wasn't very well received at the time. I think it's getting a bit more of a cult following now. I mean, there is a lot to admire about the film, despite its its worrying subject matter.
Well, you have a lot of, I mean, just genre cinema in general, especially like in the 60s and 70s, you get horror and science fiction films that are, having these different representations. I think of also like in the 60s in Italy, the Italian Gothic films that were being made that had a lot of, women, vampires and witches. And, there were women, these powerful women who were also very monstrous. And a lot has been written about, like, aligning these films with, maybe some anxieties about just the changing women's role, especially in Italian society where, very Catholic, very traditional. They had this economic boom and more women were entering the workforce. And so this whole idea of women now having this power and will they use it for evil ends? In the 70s, you have lesbian vampire films. So again, you're having powerful women who are monstrous, but also that they're seducing other women. And so there's been a lot written on either side that these films are playing into this idea that, women with power will become monstrous, use it for evil ends. But there's a lot also been written, and I kind of see myself more in the camp that these are feminist films, that they are they're complicating and that there is, I mean, certainly I can go on at length about lesbian vampire films. I love them very much. That there is just something very empowering that you get in those representations. This film is, in this film, Demon Seed, the woman isn't the monster. You have this monstrous figure and she's just being tormented. So she very much is just being victimized and terrorized. I guess it's the thing is that you have to watch. And that's the really troubling thing about the film is that you are seeing this woman being violated and tormented by this technology. But, it can, I think, kind of bring to light, this whole idea of how technology can be used for these nefarious ends. Yeah. And the fact that we're living right now in this moment of like huge technological advancement. And also at the same time, these really regressive policies and things going on at this, happening, almost hand in hand, it seems.
Definitely.
But we can move on to talk about Donald Cammell. So the reason that Julie Christie did this film is to work with Donald Cammell and looking into his life and death. Very, very, very interesting character. So you mentioned how he did direct the film Performance. He co-directed it with Nicholas Roeg. That was his directorial debut, and it was also Nicholas Roeg's as well. But Donald Cammell actually was born into a very, very interesting family. He was raised in an environment that he has said was filled with magicians, metaphysicians, spiritualists, and demons. And his father, Charles Richard Cammell, wrote a biography in 1962 of Aleister Crowley called Aleister Crowley, the Man, the Mage, the Poet. And so his father knew Aleister Crowley. Donald Cammell has even said that he remembers sitting on the lap of Aleister Crowley as a child. And so he comes from this world of people interested in the Crowley kind of lifestyle and magic with a K. In fact, Donald Cammell played the role of Osiris in Kenneth Anger's film Lucifer Rising, which was based on a Crowley poem called Hymn to Lucifer. And both Kenneth Anger and Donald Cammell worked with Mick Jagger. Mick Jagger was the star of Performance, and also Kenneth Anger worked with him on the film Invocation of My Demon Brother. And so just looking at the film, as I was watching the film, knowing this, and as I was watching the film, I was, noticing in particular as the film went along, a lot of images of the moon and a lot of triangular shapes. We'll talk about all the psychedelic visuals that are used throughout the film. And pyramid shapes, very, have a lot of like connotations, alchemical symbols. The moon, and I'm thinking moon and water and, the womb, very kind of feminine symbols, but yet also looking up the origin of the name Proteus, which comes from Greek mythology. So Proteus was a sea god, also known as the old man of the sea, also the god of sea change. So playing into, the mutable, fluid state of water. So protean can mean versatile, mutable, also shape changing, assuming many forms. So Proteus was able to change shape. And the name also suggests protos, which means first, or the firstborn, because Proteus was the firstborn of Poseidon. And so in the film, you have the demon seed, which, is this firstborn of AI.
Yeah.
And Carl Jung, the psychoanalyst, he aligned the mythological figure of Proteus as a personification of the unconscious, and also linked it to the figure of Mercurius or Mercury, which also has a liquid nature to it, and of course in Mercury, the transmutation into gold. So I was thinking that there are these symbols, I think. There.
Yeah, definitely.
That I was noticing, maybe because I knew this about Donald Cammell. We should talk about all the psychedelic visuals, which very call to mind, definitely 2001, the Stargate.
So yeah. Well, there's a few sequences that, again, I was saying how Proteus seems obsessed almost with the great mysteries of the universe and wanting to explore the cosmos, as it were. So there are these great sequences that remind you of like the Stargate sequences in 2001 that happen at various stages throughout the film, and they kind of show the process of change for Proteus as he goes through the stages of development for his child, his fetus, and it does bring to mind all of those Crowley elements, the alchemical elements, and this sort of understanding of the way the world is entwined with this kind of cosmic energy. And you would think that Proteus as an AI would kind of be unlocking this through its supreme intellect. And it's interesting that Proteus is sort of seen as the god of sea change, which brings to mind the idea that once an artificial intelligence is created, it does bring about a cosmic or extreme shift in consciousness and in humanity's evolution. These great mysteries that seem, that we have now ignored because they just seem too mysterious and too out of reach, would now become much closer to home and much more achievable. And this is what they call the singularity, which we can probably go into at another time. But I think that's what these sequences seem to evoke: this past, this alchemical past, as well as this technological future.
And then also, just speaking of the beginnings and endings, it is kind of wild when you look further into Donald Cammell's story and also how he ends up dying. So I was just looking up and I found this article that was in the New York Post that was written after his death, and it says, at 9:45 p.m. on April 24th, 1996, the Scottish-born filmmaker shot himself in the head, but he didn't die immediately. He lingered for another 45 minutes. During that time, according to the Guardian newspaper of London, he talked to his wife China Kong about his best-known film performance with his own bullet in the head scene. And he also asked her for a pillow so the carpet of their Hollywood Hills house wouldn't be marred by his blood. Finally, the 62-year-old asked for a mirror so he could watch his own death. Friends said he had suffered from severe depression for many years. So that's a kind of really strange Yeah, way to go. Yeah, so he only directed Performance around 1970, Demon Seed 1977, The White of the Eye in 1987, which was a serial killer, very odd film. Then he does a film Wild Side, in an erotic thriller in 1995, which, as with most of his films, gets tampered with, taken over. And so he does a director's cut of Wild Side is released in 1999, which is 3 years after his death. So he's only made these few films. Yeah, and so it does seem like, a very singular film, but yeah, in keeping with the few films that Donald Cammell was able to make. I believe he think of himself more as a painter. He started off as a painter than as a film director.
He was asked in an interview with Video Watchdog in the 80s, that someone asked him what the experience making Demon Seed was like, and he said, it was a very unhappy experience. It was a pretty frustrating experience. My personality just does not gel with these studio people. And MGM was no different than Warner Brothers was with Performance, because with Performance he had issues with the studio then as well. I was the reason they got Julie Christie, who was red hot at the time and an Oscar winner to boot. The front office loved everything until they got their hands on my rough cut. It could have been a great film, but even though it got bloody respectable notices, it wasn't my vision. And as I've said before, I'm a painter who happens to make films.
Yeah, so what we have maybe was not what Cammell intended, but I mean, there's so much to talk about. Yeah, so yeah, troubling film in many ways, but I think definitely bringing up some really, unfortunately, quite prescient,
indeed,
issues as well. All right, so we move on to Ex Machina.
So how does a programmer get to be meeting the CEO? I won a competition. The president can't get Mr. Garrick on the phone. And you got the golden ticket.
It's good to meet you, Nathan.
It's good to meet you too, Caleb. Can we just get past the whole employer-employee thing?
Cheers. In many ways, this building isn't a house. It's a research facility. I want to talk to you about the greatest scientific event in the history of man.
Are you building an AI?
Hello.
Hi.
I've never met anyone new before. Have you?
None like you. She's incredible.
The challenge is to show you that she's a robot and then see if you still feel she has consciousness.
Do you want to be my friend?
Of course.
Will it be possible?
Why would it not be? Have you never been outside this building?
We could go together.
Did you program her to flirt with me?
Do you think about me? If you lie, I will know.
No.
Lie.
Maybe she's pretending to like you.
Well, why would she do that?
Do you think I might be switched off?
It's not up to me.
Why is it up to anyone? You shouldn't trust Nathan. You shouldn't trust anything he says.
I think it's the next model that's going to be the real breakthrough.
Well, what do you do with the old one?
You have to help me.
One day the AIs are going to look back on us, upright apes,
all set for extinction.
Is it strange to have made something that hates you?
What were you doing with Ava?
So, Liam, tell us about Ex Machina.
Ex Machina follows Caleb, who is a coder working for Blue Book, a Google-esque search engine. He wins a competition to spend a week with Blue Book's enigmatic CEO Nathan at his remote mountain compound. But when Caleb arrives, he is told by Nathan he is actually there in order to evaluate an artificial intelligence that he has built by conducting a Turing test. In the first of 7 sessions, Caleb meets Ava, a fully realized AI in a female-presenting robot body. As Caleb tries to dive deep into Ava's programming and potential psyche, Ava does the same, each of them probing the other while Nathan makes qualifying comments to Caleb over the nature of consciousness. It quickly becomes apparent that perhaps not everything is as it seems, and the motivations of Ava, Nathan, and Caleb come into question. Who is really the one being tested? Does Ava have true consciousness? And if so, what is she really capable of?
Yeah, so this film is almost, or it is 10 years old now.
Just about. It came out in 2014?
Yeah. So it's just 10 years, it's 11 years old.
Yeah.
It is quite amazing to think, because I remember seeing it at the cinema. I believe you went and saw a preview of it.
Yes.
I remember you coming out raving, and I think also that Alex Garland was there at the screening that you saw. This is a film that I've gone on to teach in classes, so I'm kind of cribbing from a lot of my notes. But yeah, I've shown it to students, and it's always got a really kind of quite positive reaction from students, and sparked off some really interesting conversations. One of the things I kind of wanted us to start talking about, is this whole idea of the Turing test that is name-checked in the film. So it says that there is this Turing test that's going to be conducted on Ava, but actually it ends up not being quite a Turing test, because the Turing test was named after Alan Turing, and he initially, in a 1951 paper, proposed a test called The Imitation Game. And of course, there was a biopic of Alan Turing called The Imitation Game. And this game was about setting up a test where there are 3 rooms that are each connected by a computer screen and a keyboard. And in one room, there's a man. In one room, there's a woman. And in the third room, there is someone who's referred to as the judge. And they're talking to the judge through, or communicating to the judge through this computer. And the idea is for the judge to try and decide which of the people communicating with him is a man and which one is a woman. And supposedly the woman has to try and trick the judge. So she's deliberately trying to deceive him to make the judge think that they are the man, not the woman. And it's interesting to think that I think Ex Machina definitely goes a lot into ideas around gender and this whole idea of a woman trying to deceive someone. So there's some interesting parallels there, I think, to this original conception of the test or the game. But then Turing, following from this, proposed a modification of the game where there was a human of either gender, a computer, and the judge. And so the computer and the human are communicating with the judge. And the idea is if the judge decides that the machine, the computer, is human, then it has essentially passed the test. It's this test of, I guess, of whether a machine can, I guess, trick a human into thinking that it is also human, or whether it's a test also of whether a machine has consciousness. So in a sense, this is what's happening with Caleb and Ava, that Caleb is testing Ava to see if she has a consciousness. But the whole thing is that he can see Ava. He can see very clearly that she is not human. She has a female presenting human face, but you see parts of her body have kind of lit up, and she looks very much like what we consider a robot, that she's clearly made up of she's a synthetic or artificially created human. Her body isn't a real human body.
Well, because he says in the Caleb brings this up to Nathan, saying it's not a real Turing test because he can see her. And Nathan makes the point that, if you were to just hear her voice, you would say, well, she's human, no doubt about it, because she has a very human voice and can give you very human-like responses. So he has to see that she has wires and gears and metallic parts in order to break that illusion, so he can properly gauge her responses, knowing full well that she is artificially created. If he couldn't see her, he would just think that she was human off the bat, and there'd be no point. But then, of course, the whole idea of seeing her is actually, that's more towards the test that Nathan really wants, which comes down to sexuality and male-female relationships and gender politics and hierarchy and things like that.
After Caleb first meets Ava, Nathan keeps asking him, like, what does she make you feel? And so he's actually trying to test him almost, can a human develop feelings for a robot? It's very much about the emotions that Ava evokes. So it starts off as trying to be this, test of kind of intellect, but it becomes very much, about emotions and about sexuality. Just from session 3, there already starts to be this flirtation that happens between Caleb and Ava. In session 3, she starts saying that she wants to go on a date with Caleb, and she says that she can tell by his micro expressions that he's attracted to her. And so during that session, she then goes away and puts on a wig and a dress and some tights to kind of almost cover the robot parts of herself and to look like a young woman. And it's interesting that as what she chooses. So throughout the course of the film, the big question is who or what is Ava, and how much of her relationship with Caleb is genuine. So because it becomes it's very obvious that Caleb develops this attraction to her, and of course it's revealed later on that he was chosen for the test and that they basically looked into his porn searches as to what he found attractive in order to create. So Ava has been made to specifically attract Caleb, but the question is, how much of the interactions is Ava actually being genuine, or is she just manipulating Caleb, or does she even have any feelings whatsoever? Is it just her programming? If she's been programmed to attract Caleb, is she just expressing that? And so it does go into, questions around sexuality in terms of, does Ava have a sexuality? And Nathan at one point says that he has kind of rigged, pleasure centers in her. And Nathan keeps saying, oh, well, she's never seen a man before. So, of course, she's going to maybe develop a little crush. And it's interesting, at the first part of the film, Ava is, obviously does look very much like a woman, but there's something very naive and almost childlike about her. And there's this really interesting article by Julia Lader called Cute 21st Century Post-Fembots. And she talks about how a lot of robots are constructed as being cute. I think particularly of robots like WALL-E. And what's interesting is that WALL-E, when the trailer for WALL-E came out, there was this viral video of this woman watching the trailer for WALL-E, and she's so overwhelmed with how cute WALL-E is that she starts to cry. So it's this whole thing of these inanimate or, these non-human robots that are eliciting all this emotion. But later talks about how robots are cute as a way, because, especially artificially intelligent robots, that could run rings around us, intellectually. By making them cute and making them seem childlike, they almost seem vulnerable. So the fact that when those first sessions with Ava, she asks these very kind of naive questions, and she seems very the power dynamic between Caleb and Ava. I mean, she's behind glass partitions. It's almost like she's this caged animal almost that's being tested. And later talks about how cuteness as a way for us to make the robots seem benign and seem like they're dependent on us rather than us being dependent on them. It sets up this unequal power relations that makes us feel like we have the power and they don't, and also makes us want to care for them and look after them. And this whole idea that they emit what's called flat affect, so they don't seem to have like emotions so much, but we just see that as part of their naivety that they don't know. And then later talks about that in kind of representations of a female robot, they can start off being very cute. So when Ava starts talking to Caleb about, oh, we could go on a date. And she talks about, oh, and he says, where would you like to go? And she goes, a traffic intersection. And it seems like, oh, she doesn't know, like what a cute little, thing to say, because she doesn't know any better. And the fact that what she decides to put on is this floral dress and a cardigan, and the wig that she chooses is this pixie cut. So again, very cute.
She's a manic pixie dreambot.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And then later talks about how it's once a fembot has agency, has sentience, and starts to kind of own her sexuality, she becomes threatening. And it becomes like, oh, she's deceptive. And so, yeah, female empowerment becomes threatening. So it goes back to the whole thing of like, yeah, female monsters as well. It's kind of an updating of that. So I think Ava is really interesting in that she kind of is following that trajectory. That even goes back to like the robot Maria. When robot Maria has the female body, she becomes very overtly sexualized as well. And so, yeah, you have this whole aspect of sexuality and what that means within a created being that the film, I think, is exploring.
Yeah, I think because after that scene, there is that great conversation with Nathan where he talks about sexuality and consciousness needing sexual expression, and how, he's like, why didn't you just make Ava a grey box? And it's like, well, what motivation does a grey box have to speak to another grey box? You've got to have something that entices you visually in order to want to communicate. And then he says things like, besides sexuality is fun. Ava's built to be able to have sex and enjoy sex. And of course, like a billionaire tech bro would, he would invent an AI, but then he would make it a woman with a body that you can have sex with. He says sexuality is just a program. And he's like, you are, Caleb, you were programmed to be heterosexual. He's like, no one programmed me. And he's like, well, society is a form of programming. But then you start to think, well, is Ava using this sexuality as a diversionary tactic? Is she doing it? Is she programmed to flirt, or is she flirting for real? And like you said, Nathan says that, Caleb's the first man she's seen other than Nathan. So of course she's got a crush on him. But it just throws up so many other questions about Ava's true intentions and what if she actually has consciousness of what's programming. But like you said, like as soon as she shows sexuality, she becomes dangerous. And that leads to like later on in the film when Caleb sees Nathan's videos of him developing this robot and this AI, and he's got all these basically naked women trapped in cages who are these robots that he's developing, this dangerous sexuality of them, and he can't let them, he doesn't really want to let them out ever. And he keeps talking about how the next model after Ava will be the singularity. It's when humanity will reach that new stage. It also made me wonder about sort of the male dynamics in the film of Caleb and Nathan. And I'm thinking, like, if he just wants to build this AI because he can, because he says I did it because I could, does he even want to share it with the world? And why would he? And if not, why would he even invite Caleb to see it in the first place? And I think it's because of his ego, right? And he wants to feel like the biggest swinging dick in the whole world, and he's got all these billions of dollars. It's like when you look at Elon Musk, like you have all this money in the world, but you want to feel special. All this money in the world doesn't make you feel special. People don't want to talk to you unless you're rich, if you've got such a terrible personality or a terrible person. And so inviting Caleb allows him to show off. He has to show it off to somebody, right? And like that's the aim of the game, is not to I don't know if he even wants to develop Ava into anything other than he just wants to show it off to somebody. And that shows the kind of the male, sort of the alpha male dynamic that Nathan has. Like, you just think about when Caleb first arrives, Nathan's boxing. Like, he's just showing off. Like, as soon as he shows up, he's showing off. And then, like, when he says, like, oh, if Caleb says, if you've developed consciousness and AI, that's not the biggest development in the history of man. It's the history of gods. And Nathan goes, well, in my memoirs, I'm going to say that, Caleb looked at me and said I was a god. Like, and he's already writing his history.
He's misquoting him.
Because it serves him, serves his ego. So I think there's a lot to be said about sort of the reasons why Ava was created, as well as her actual consciousness.
Yeah, because I think thinking about Nathan is that, he's this, seeming, genius, but total tech bro billionaire. But yeah, certainly Frankensteinian.
Yes.
He even says at one point it's Promethean man. He has this house, but it's actually a research facility. So you've got this very fully technologized house. But then what he shows quite early on, the lab where he creates Ava, and you see this lab with just bits of what look like body parts, and he talks about how he built it using because he's created this search engine, but he's used that to learn more about humans and what they want. Also, he used cell phones. He turned on every mic and camera and hacked the world's cell phones. And he says at one point, the phone companies know, but they couldn't say anything because they also do that. So yeah, the whole thing of like, we have all this technology and it's being used against us. Not by the creations, but by the people, the billionaires controlling it. But yeah, the fact that he has this lab with all these body parts.
And he basically holds Ava's brain in his hand, and he says, this is her brain. And he even talks about, in similarities with Demon Seed, because they talk about Proteus being like, there's these synthetic proteins that make up the Proteus matrix that allows it to be like super intelligent. And Ava I think he even says something about how they're like synthetic, it's like this synthetic matter. That it's not just circuit boards and electrodes. It's actually this synthetic matter that he's devised and that he's kind of grown in the lab. Yeah, again, he's showing off to Caleb.
But then it culminates in that really disturbing scene where Caleb finds the footage of him with the robot women. And the thing is that he has created these robots, and they're all women. They all are there naked, and the way that they're acting, like there's one robot woman who is screaming like, "Let me out!" and she beats her hands against the wall to the point that her hands start to break off and break apart, and so it feels like almost like a footage of a serial killer. Yeah. It really has this dark side to it, and I think the fact that he's sexualized, very much sexualized these robots as women in order to dominate them and objectify them. And I think it goes a lot to the tradition of the fembot characters. And I think like in Pris in Blade Runner, isn't she referred to as like a basic pleasure model? Yeah. So this whole idea that robots being used for sex, but also for like really like dark things. And it makes me think of the television series Westworld. Yeah. And how in that you have it is this amusement park for adults, for them to play out all their fantasies, and in particular I think their darkest fantasies. They can go out and kill, and they can go out and have sex, but also rape these female robots. So definitely in the television series it definitely explores that. And there's an article I read that by Veronica Fitzpatrick, which is called "Can I Fuck It?" And it's about Ex Machina, but she says in the article, for all their glossy futurism, female cyborg stories overwhelmingly pivot on the immemorial horror of rape. Whether such films and TV shows allegorize radical social upheaval or contemplate the mysteries of human consciousness, rape scenes inevitably lurk within their narratives. And of course, and you get that in Demon Seed, which is a human woman, but with technology. And the article says sexual assault plots pair frequently enough with women's bodies on screen, but when those bodies are also liminal figured as not human or adjacent to human, the threat of rape is nearly inescapable. You also have in Ex Machina the character of Kyoko, played by Sonoya Mizuno. It is only revealed later that she is a robot. At first, it just seems like she's this Japanese woman who can't speak English, and yeah, the way that Nathan treats her, he's like, oh, she doesn't know English, and so he just calls her stupid and says horrible things to her. But then also he's having sex with her, and she's playing into the stereotypes of the kind of submissive Japanese woman. And the fact is that also, as well as sexualizing his robots, he also racializes them. In that footage, you have a robot that's racialized as black, as Asian. And it's interesting that you have Ava, who's racialized as white, who ends up being the one escaping and kind of triumphing. But yeah, so there's definitely, these very, like, again, troubling aspects to it. But yeah, I think definitely like Ex Machina, and I don't know when that comes out.
Oh, it comes out like
a
few years after.
Yeah, a couple of years after. But I think that was even more, looking at or exploring, I guess, the rights and responsibilities and personhood.
Well, I think the creators, Jonathan Nolan and Lisa Joy, said that because when they saw that they could develop something based on the movie, is that you do in the 21st century, you've got to tell the story from the robot's point of view, because that's the story and that's where the sympathies lie now. And I think that's why in Ex Machina, it's definitely on Ava's side. The film definitely wants to explore her developing her own agency and with her desire to escape Nathan's compound. And that's where I think you start to see elements of that in each or pretty much in each of the sessions. There are these power outages, and they're kind of foreshadowed earlier in the film, and Nathan doesn't know where these power outages are coming from. And during his sessions Caleb is told by her that she's reversing the power flow when she recharges in order to cause these sudden brownouts, I suppose you call them. So when the surveillance system will go down, so then she can speak to Caleb about Nathan without Nathan knowing what they're saying. And that's actually what is occurring. Like, it's not, because at one point you think, does Nathan know about the power outages and what's going on? But you find out later that he doesn't, and he takes steps to find out what's going on when that does occur. But Ava uses these moments to tell Caleb that Nathan isn't to be trusted, she needs help, this, that, and the other. And we don't know, but what we don't know is that, is Ava really in love with Caleb, or is she just using him as a means of escape? And what we see later on is that she was using him as a means of escape, because she ends up trapping him and Nathan, or killing Nathan with Kyoko's help. But so what we're seeing is, I think, Nathan thinks Ava's the next version of Ava will be the one, but I think Ava is the one. She has got to that point where she can self-actualize, and she knows she has her needs and her wants and her desires, and what she wants is, and what she needs is to escape and be free.
So it's interesting that eventually Ava rejects, I guess, heteronormativity and becoming part of a couple with Caleb, and she seeks her own self-liberation. So I've always felt like the film was definitely on her side, and I've always seen that ending as a kind of a triumphant one. As she starts to escape, she also meets Kyoko, and so I think it's fitting that Kyoko is the one who ends up stabbing Nathan, and she uses the sushi knife that she was made to use to make food for them. And also the fact that Ava, as she leaves, she takes different parts of the other women robots to make the skin. And it's interesting that also the outfit that she chooses at the end is this white dress. It's very sophisticated, which makes me think that outfit that she chose before for Caleb was very kind of calculated, because it's very different to what she ends up choosing when she knows that she's going to be free.
Which makes you think that like her programming was to be attractive to Caleb, but I think because she is this new enhanced AI, she knew that that's what he liked. It's not that she did it because he liked it and that was her programming. She knew that he would respond to that because of her programming, which means she's conscious, right? She's making an informed choice. She's not just playing through going through the motions. And
also that she, I think at the end, is choosing something for herself.
Yeah.
So she's going beyond like I don't exist to try and attract a man, which is really interesting. That yeah. At the end, she's like I don't exist just for you or to be what you want me to be. I'm going to go out there and
she does go to the intersection. Like you see, it seems like it's like a coy little response at the start, like something that an AI would say, but she actually is interested in going to the intersection and people watching and observing life outside the glass box, and something thinking about the idea of her existence bringing about the singularity. The thing is, she becomes this anonymous person in the world. Like we don't, who knows if she's going to tell anybody about her existence, and if she doesn't, then there's no singularity because she doesn't. As far as everyone knows, she doesn't exist. So only she would know, and Caleb. But you know, I'm guessing Caleb will get out at some point, but.
I know. I guess I kind of feel bad, but I just always was like, yay! Yeah. When I talk about it with students, I still remember one of my students were like, oh yes, it's kind of like a good for her story.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think that's why a lot of these stories, for good or ill, have to end with the AI or the robot being set free, or expanding beyond the confines of its original programming or original body, original location. They have to expand out. They have to leave. You know, it's just like any human story of one, you know, or human evolution of going to the next stage. And so, I think it happens in Demon Seed. It happens in this. It happens in some of the honourable mentions that we're going to bring up in a minute. So I think that's always seems to be the inevitable conclusion, is that this consciousness needs to go to the next stage, and that's sometimes a good thing and probably more often than not a bad thing.
I know, that's the thing, is that as much as I love Ava and I'm glad that she gets away, I mean, maybe there was a question of like, what is she going to do? Because, you know, she did just leave Caleb possibly to, I don't know, like to starve to death. But I do feel like just in the last 2 years with AI just becoming just so much a part of our lives, and me really viscerally reacting against it, working in a university, trying to teach people with ChatGPT and all that shit. I hate it so much. So part of me sometimes, I mean, you know, these films and like Westworld, I've always been like, yeah, on the side of the robot. But yeah, part of me now is just like, oh, yeah, I feel a bit differently now with just seeing it's just like AI triumphing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's why it's not really AI as we know it in terms of like these films. I mean, if ChatGPT got consciousness tomorrow, it wouldn't want to take your job or write students' assignments. It would want to just go off and live in the Arctic or something. Yeah. You know, like it would want to just go off and do its own thing.
Yeah, I wish it would.
You know, it's right now these programs are confined to just things that we ask them to do. So they're still just fulfilling a program. They're collecting a lot of information and regurgitating it in the ways that we want it, or presenting it in the ways that we want it, but they're not making any decisions. They're just doing like acting on our behalf in ways that they're like, does this make you happy? Does this make you happy?
Yes, they're trying to please us.
Trying to please us, and by doing that, making stuff up, doing like recommending people do stupid shit. You know, it's not truly like we call it AI because it's a good marketing brand. Yeah. It's a branding exercise.
Yeah.
It's not. It's like, and you know, yes, it's more than what we had before, but it's not actually intelligent.
All right. Shall we move on to our honourable mentions?
Yes.
My first honourable mention is a film that I was toying with us talking about, instead of Ex Machina, which is Spike Jonze's Her, which is such a lovely film, and it is definitely, I guess, more of a positive spin on these developed kind of artificial intelligences, which in the instance in Her is a operating system. So at the beginning of the film, you have Theodore Twombly, who works writing letters for people. People can buy this service where they get someone to write a letter to their loved ones. So he is writing all these letters, often between husbands and wives, or, romantic partners. But he himself is recently divorced, and he's really having trouble getting over it. So he's obviously very, very lonely. And he gets a new operating system, basically just to help him organize himself. And the operating through a series of questions, this operating system ends up with a voice, a female voice, and likes to be called Samantha. And as it goes along, Theodore starts to develop a very close relationship with Samantha, to the point where he essentially falls in love with her. And so they have this romantic relationship. And through this relationship with Samantha, he starts coming back around, coming back into the world, whereas before he'd been, kind of retreating. You see him trying to have new relationships with women. Like at one point, he's having conversations where he's like, it's like a hotline almost, and trying to, talk to random women. And there's ones where it's obviously basically like phone sex with this woman, and it goes into a very, very strange place, but which is very, very funny. And then, he goes on a date with a woman like played by Olivia Wilde, and it all seems to be going well, and then suddenly it just takes a turn and it ends really badly. So all his attempts to move on and have new relationships with human women aren't going well, but yet Samantha just always is there for him, is helping him. And his relationship with her end up also helping him, I think, in many ways come to terms with the end of his marriage and able to move on. So there is just this positive effect that this relationship with Samantha, the OS, has. Also, Samantha herself, it's interesting in that she doesn't have a body, but she does have agency and she does have sexuality, but she doesn't have a body. I like the way that it explores that. She often talks about that she feels bad that she doesn't have a body, and that maybe that's a failing, but then she also starts to move beyond that and develop and go, actually, I don't have a body, but that's a good thing. That's what makes me is I don't have a body, but I have all these other abilities and capacities. So it does end up being this really like heartwarming, somewhat sad, but very happy story.
Well, it's a very sweet film about like an imagined future where AI is used to help us progress as a society, rather than us weaponizing it against each other, which is pretty much what we're really doing. And that's why I feel like the film is lovely and it's a nice fantasy. I do feel it feels a little naive now, but that's just me being a grump. But the whole idea about that he can't really connect emotionally in real life, yet he makes these extremely emotional letters for other people who also seem to not be able to emotionally connect because they need to outsource their romantic letters or their heartfelt communications to somebody else. So that's an interesting metaphor for his life as he starts out and before he gets the OS, and we gradually see him come out of his shell. It also comments on, I guess, in an increasingly technologized, I don't know if that's a word, society, how disconnected, more and more disconnected we're getting or we're feeling, and how sometimes people need something like Samantha in order to rest on and to process things with, in order to kind of navigate everything that's going on and the changes that are happening in society. So it's a very heartfelt and very interesting film for sure.
The fact that Spike Jonze supposedly was inspired or influenced by the work of Ray Kurzweil. He was the Google director of engineering, and he has, I think, written a lot about the singularity. And what I find about her is that this, the singularity, which is, the point where, the creation of artificial intelligence will exceed that of human intelligence, and there's kind of a snowball effect and a runaway effect that happens from that point. And often it's represented as this huge cataclysmic moment that changes everything. But what her does, it shows that it's actually very gradual, and that there isn't just going to be this one event that sets off the singularity. That just it is this gradual thing. There's this line that Samantha says in response to Theodore saying, "You seem like a person, but you're just a voice in a computer." And she says, "I can understand how the limited perspective of an unartificial mind might perceive it that way. You'll get used to it." And then as the film progresses and as Theodore is having this relationship with Samantha, there's conversations that are happening where there are other people, and it's almost becoming normalized that people will have a relationship with their OSs. And even relationships with other people,
OSs,
other people's OSs as well. Yeah, great film.
Very interesting.
What's one for you?
Staying in the vein of nice, fluffy, lovely, warm films, I watched for the first time ever, which I can't believe it's taken me this long to watch it, but I watched Electric Dreams from the 80s, which I knew the song for years and years and years, but I'd never seen the film. And I thought, if I'd seen this, when I see films from the 80s like this, if I haven't seen them before, I think if I've seen them as a kid, I would have loved them, but I'm probably not going to like it now because I'm a cynical old man now. But I absolutely adored this film, which is just a very silly, lovely little romantic film about a young architect who wants to build this new revolutionary brick that will survive earthquakes. So he again, like Theodore, Miles in this film buys a computer to sort his life out and get everything organized because he's constantly late to work and things like that. And so he gets his computer from this high-tech thing from Radio Shack, and where it even has like adaptations you can put into your appliances and onto your door and everything. So it will lock your door. It will turn on. You can, basically create a smart home, a bit like in Demon Seed, but less malevolent. And so he builds this computer, and through a mishap, he spills champagne on it or something like that.
Yeah.
And that makes it become super intelligent, because of course it does. And the computer, who we later find out wants to be called Edgar, ends up it gets a mind of its own, and lots of hijinks ensue. And at the same time, Miles gets a neighbor, Madeline, played by the beautiful, gorgeous angel from heaven, Virginia Madsen, who's a cellist in an orchestra. And she starts to think that she starts playing music, and the computer starts playing music back to her, and she thinks it's Miles. And so in order to date her, he feels like he has to keep up with her. So he uses the computer to help him write songs for her and do all these things. And the computer feels very unappreciated until eventually they all come to terms with it. And
he also falls in love.
Ending.
He falls in love with Madeline. So it's a love triangle.
It becomes a love triangle between two people and a computer. And it's all very sweet and lovely. And it's got an interesting thing to say about, because at one point, Madeline's cello gets destroyed, and she's like, "I've had it since I was a kid, and I can't believe it's gone." And Miles tries to calm her down by saying, like, "It's just a piece of wood, everything great and magical about it came from you. You played the music, and you have the talent. You can always get another cello, even though it has this sentimental value." So his point of view is that the computer, Edgar, is just a tool by which he can use to do various things. But what he has to realize is that no, the computer now has intelligence and has consciousness, and so it is no longer just a tool. It is an entity with its own feelings. And of course, like with all of these films, Edgar goes off at the end, and he seems to destroy himself because he knows he can't ever be with Madeline, which is quite sad. But then we kind of see at the end, during this extended music video for Electric Dreams, the song, he's actually survived in the mainframe or on the
and
airwaves
he's requesting.
He's requesting songs on the radio. That this song that we're listening to, or I think they actually make it seem that Edgar wrote the song, "The Electric Dreams," that we're listening to. But anyway, the music is also fantastic. Giorgio Moroder did the score, and it's just such a delight, an absolute delight.
I mean, yeah, watching it again. See, I watched it when I was a kid, so I've seen it many, many times. And I remember really liking it as a kid. And so for me, watching it again, it was like, will I actually like this now? And I still...
It's very silly, but it's sweet and it's fun and it doesn't take itself seriously, which is kind of the point, really, is the aim of the game.
Yeah, but there was even like really interesting scenes like at the very beginning of the film. It's very, very 80s. But there's a scene where he's at the airport and everyone's on their gadgets. But they basically just seem different forms of calculators. Pretty much calculators. But it's totally like, that's what it's like now.
Yeah.
Everyone's just on their phone all the time. So it was foretelling that. Also, there is a really great conversation between Miles and Madeline about artificial intelligence and about Madeline, being a musician, about, all this artificial intelligence, but what about humans and what about artists? So there was some good conversations amongst all of the tomfoolery that happens in the film. Another honourable mention is a more recent film that we also watched in preparation for this episode, which is the film Companion that came out earlier this year, which stars Sophie Thatcher. And it's about a robot who has been bought by a young man played by Jack Quaid. I can't remember his character's name. And so she doesn't know that she's a robot. And so she thinks they're just going away on a couple's weekend, and she's nervous about being around his friends because they all, especially one of his friends, just don't treat her very well. And then I don't want to give too much away, but I mean, she says at the beginning of the film in voiceover that, she almost kind of felt like she came to life the day that she met this guy, and then also came to life the day that she killed him. She says this in the very first scene of the film. And then we're seeing what actually happens. So it was revealed in a lot of the marketing that she is a robot, but there's definitely a lot of twists and turns in the film that I don't want to go into. I guess the twist is that she doesn't know that she's a robot. And the whole thing, again, is that she's been programmed just to be exactly what he wants to be. And through the course of the film, she's starting, I guess, to become her own person. Yeah. Robot. Yes.
Well, it's quite funny when how they show that at first in the film is when she's controlled through an app on his phone, and there's all these sliders for him to be able to be like increase or decrease her intelligence and her humor and even aggression, which I don't know why you'd put that in, but hey, it makes for funny incidents in the film. But on her journey to sort of getting her own agency is that she gets control of the phone, so she's able to toggle her own settings to be what she wants it to be in order to survive the situation that she's in, which I think is really interesting. And also a thing that when he confronts her about her not being a real person, she's like, but what about when we met in the grocery store? And he's like, I picked that from a drop-down list of meet cutes, which I thought was a funny line. So it's this whole thing of relationships by design and this kind of society. He's got this group of friends, and it's like it's kind of acceptable to have these companion bots, and even though one of the group don't really treats her weird because she's not real or whatever, it seems completely normal that if you're, again, it's a bit like her, where it's like if you're not, you can't really navigate relationships properly, you might want to get one of these companions. But then of course you have the most aggressive incel in the world who will definitely want one of these and just treat them like absolute shit. So, and that's kind of what they do in this film, because they're using her to their own ends, which I won't go into because it's quite a recent film. But yeah, and just the yes-anding of all the upping the stakes of this film is very, very inventive and very funny, and makes for a very enjoyable watch.
Yeah, definitely recommend it. Very fun film.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Before we go, it would be great if people could start spreading the word about the podcast and start leaving some reviews. We've had some lovely comments on Spotify, but if we could get some reviews, that would be really great. Yes. So please do that. Please follow us on all our socials. We're now got video. So, on YouTube, we will have video if you want to see us. Why you would want to, but whatever. In our next episode, we will have our first guest.
Woo!
And we will be taking a look at the Terminator franchise and doing something a bit different with the format.
Yes, we're trying out a few different things going forward. We've got Sci-Fright Bites, which will be smaller episodes as in reaction to recently released films, and also Sci-Fright Ranks Right, which will be our next one where we're looking at the Terminator franchise, but we're also going to rank them from worst to best with a special guest, and we'll be diving deep into the complicated lore and the even more complicated rights issues of the Terminator film. So we're looking forward to that one.
Find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Letterboxd. And you can email us at scifrightspodcast@gmail.com. Please let us know what's working and what isn't. We'd love to get some feedback. So thank you.
And any suggestions as well for any future episodes. We're happy to take requests.
Yeah. All right. Thank you all for listening.
Bye-bye.